What we're going to talk about today is something called logical fallacies. And the reason we're going to talk about it is when you're creating your arguments for your particular speech, for your persuasive especially, one of the problems students tend to run into is instead of using good arguments that they think are good arguments, they end up using what are called logical fallacies. Now, logical fallacies are just basically mistakes in reasoning, meaning you didn't use the right formula, whether it was inductive or deductive. And there's all sorts of different kinds of logical fallacies you can actually make. And because they all exist out there and we tend to use them a lot, it becomes a problem for your speech. Now, the real problem with why people tend to use them, at least what I've observed over the years in different classes that I've taught, is students have a tendency to try to go for the easy answer. And the easy answer is quite often the one that seems like it's right in front of them, but it may not be correct. But because it's in front of them, that's the one that they actually use. So let me give you a couple of different types of these kinds of kind of false equivalents of what you could actually use on different speeches that would cause you problems. Like we have one that's called slippery slope, and that's the idea that if something happens, it's going to lead to something else that's going to lead to another thing right down the line. Now, historically in the United States, we've actually used slippery slopes quite often. If you've ever heard the argument, smoking leads to marijuana, which then leads to hard drugs, that then leads to your life being completely out of control. That's a slippery slope. And it took decades for scientists to finally get the United States government to stop saying it, because it's not actually a real slippery slope, such as if you start smoking, it's not going to lead to any of the other things unless you were intending to go to those other things in the first place. So that's what's called a slippery slope. And when you use that and you say, okay, if we don't do this today, these horrible things are going to happen, immediately you lose all credibility. And if you lose all credibility, nobody's going to listen to anything else that you actually have to say. Okay, let's talk about a couple of other ones. Hasty generalization. It's a fallacy that involves making a generalization with too few examples. So you just basically make leaps of logic that don't actually exist. Let's see, a straw man. Straw man is probably one of the most misunderstood logical fallacies because basically, think of it this way. If you have an argument that you want to, not an argument, say you have a situation you want to defeat a particular argument, but the argument that you're trying to defeat is so well constructed, people have a tendency to make a weaker constructed argument and then argue against that instead of the original argument that they should be arguing against in the first place. And that does cause a problem. Sorry, my printer decides every now and then it just wants to start making noise, so nothing I can really do about that. Anyway, red herring. So years and years ago, I was playing a computer game, one of the first computer games that came out, and it was called Starflight. And it's kind of one of those little cool Star Trek-ish kind of games. But anyway, so you drive around, you fly around on your big spaceship, and there's all these things going on in the universe. And then at one point, you get this little buggy and you ride around on different planets and you pick up minerals and all these kinds of things. So anyway, one of the things you do is you look for artifacts. You find artifacts and you take the artifacts themselves, and they're usually worth some money, at least in the game. And so at this one planet I happened to go to, wow, can't even speak today. I happened to notice this one little artifact that was out there that was worth an unbelievable amount of credits in the game. And so, and it weighed 50.5 units of whatever they were using at that time. And so I decided I wanted this thing because it was worth, like I said, an unbelievable amount of money. And so I tried to get it, but then noticed my little buggy that I mentioned can only carry a certain amount of weight, which would happen to be 50 units. Now this thing weighed 50.5 or 50.1. It was really, really close to whatever the number was. And I tried everything possible to get this little item. I couldn't get it. I kept going back and forth and all that over and over again, trying to get that specific artifact because it, like I said, this would have changed my game forever because I'd definitely be winning because it was that worth that much. And so I kept trying. I kept trying to land close to it. Maybe that would help. Couldn't get it onto my buggy because my little buggy just wouldn't fit enough weight. And so I finally ended up just giving up on trying to get this little artifact that I figured would have like changed my entire game. So I played that game decades ago. And so decades later, I still think about that particular item. Now let me tell you kind of why I think about that particular item. The name of this item was called the red herring. And that's the one I told you we're going to be talking about today. And so the definition of it is creating a diversion or introducing an irrelevant point to distract someone. Now, if you think about it, I was completely distracted by this. Years and years later, I was working for the same company that made that game. And so I happened to find the guy who created the game, and I still had something that we needed to discuss about this because I was bothered by I could never figure out how to get that little thing into my buggy. And so I went to this guy, the lead designer of this game, and I said, there was this little artifact that you had on this planet in Starflight, and I could never pick it up. And it's bugged me to this day. How was I supposed to ever get it? And he looked at me and he goes, what was the name of the item? Because he knew exactly what I was talking about. And I said it was called the red herring. And he goes, and you do know what a red herring is, right? Now, of course, like everybody else at that time, I'm like, oh, of course, yeah, I know what it is. Everybody knows what it is, right? He goes, so what is it? I always hated questions like that. And so basically, I didn't actually know the answer. He goes, go look it up and then tell me what you think. And so basically, I looked it up, saw, like I said, it was a diversion or some irrelevant kind of thing. And so I went, oh, wow. And I never did go back to him. As a matter of fact, I was too embarrassed to ever talk to him again. But that's kind of what happens. That's what a red herring actually is. One of the other ones I want to talk about, because I think it's really, really important because we use it all the time. It's used in politics constantly, and people use it so much they don't even think about it anymore, and they just keep using it, and it's both irrelevant and not important and should never be used. And it's the idea of an ad hominem. So say I'm arguing with somebody or say I want to convince somebody of something. And in the process of trying to convince that person to do something, I don't have a good argument for why that person is actually wrong because I haven't analyzed that kind of information so far. And so what I then do is I attack the person instead of the argument. So if somebody comes up to me and says, well, this is why I think we shouldn't be putting, plants in this particular area, and my argument is, gee, I don't know much about whether plants would be good or bad in this particular area, but I don't really have a response. So here's my response. I don't think putting plants there is a good idea because you're a really stupid person. That's an ad hominem attack, and we use it all the time. And like I said, we use it in politics nonstop. I wish we'd stop using it, but we won't. And that's generally what it is. So these are a few of the different things we should not be using in the arguments that we use. Like I said, they're called logical fallacies. And the more you can avoid those and make good arguments, the better off you're going to be.